Welcome back to Poprageous. I'm Danny Alex. Today I'm dissecting The Northman and the reasons why it failed so miserably at the box office. With a $90 million budget, it lost almost $100 million after adding in the marketing and distribution costs. But why? Why did such a highly anticipated movie do so bad in theaters? Let's get the good points out of the way first. The cinematography, sets, costumes, and lighting were fantastic. There is very little, if anything, on the technical side to fault on this movie. It has a very authentic feel, which can be hard to get right when filming any historical piece. All of The Northman's problems lie primarily in the story and script. A well-written revenge story has specific elements that need to be done correctly for the story to work and endear itself to audiences. Most revenge stories involve the protagonist losing a loved one at the hands of the antagonist, and then, against all odds, the protagonist extracts revenge on the killer. It's not an overly complicated theme, but the various moving parts associated with a revenge story can be difficult to create so that the audience is emotionally engaged with the protagonist's journey for revenge. With that said, let's break down The Northman and see why it didn't work. The movie's problems start right away with an underwhelming opening scene. The first 5 minutes of a movie are critical to emotionally hook the audience, to make them care for the protagonist or unequivocally hate the antagonist. The Northman doesn't do either one of these very well. The opening scene is the shot of an active volcano, with the narrator's voice telling us about a prince destined for Valhalla. The dialogue and its phrasing tries to use a sort of old Shakespearean Norse or Slavic style that does nothing but confuse and disengage the audience. I'll touch on the dialogue a little more later on. Next, we see 4 Viking ships approaching a walled city built overlooking the ocean. Now, there are a few odd things, such as the fact that there's no natural harbor, so building a port and ship docks would see them wiped away by the ocean in no time. Nor do we see any horses, but yet, King Arvandil rides in on horseback along with his entire army. Again, not a huge thing, but it all has a cumulative negative effect. The first thing the script needs to do is to build a powerful bond between the protagonist and the person who is taken away from them. In this case, a father and son relationship. This bond needs to be deep and emotional so that when his father is murdered in front of him by his uncle, we feel the same emotional pain that Amleth feels. This is his first major blunder with the script. He's so hung up on showing a detailed account of old Viking customs and folklore instead of focusing on relatable themes the love of father and son have for each other. It's critical and forms the fulcrum to the entire story. If the love between them is not convincingly created, the revenge storyline cannot work because it's that very motivation that sets our protagonist on a path of vengeance and hooks us, the audience, because we are now hellbent for revenge as well, and we want a payoff. The dialogue only adds to the audience not becoming invested because what and how things are said. None of it is relatable. The scene that really took me emotionally out of this movie is the scene where they pretend to be dogs, barking and acting as if they're wild animals. This doesn't build a relatable bond between father and son, and in fact, takes away from it because of how ridiculous it comes across. In the TV show Vikings, they used Viking customs and culture throughout the series, but Travis Fimmel was easily relatable to the audience with a strong emotional bond with his wife and kids. I mean, you cared for them. The Northman never comes close to convincing the audience of the love between King Arvandil and his son Amleth. There is no feeling of a deep emotional connection between them so that when he's murdered by his brother, we feel very little, and the script fails to invest us into the story. The other important ingredient to a revenge story is a genuine hatred for the antagonist, the one responsible for taking the life of the loved one from the protagonist. He has to come across as arrogant, self-centered, bombastic, and that everything he has wasn't earned, but rather taken by force from someone else. And in this case, it was his desire to be king and willing for him to kill his brother to get it. The antagonist in The Northman is Fjolnir the Brotherless. Eggers fails to give the audience any profound hatred of this man. Yes, we dislike him, but it's not utter contempt for his existence because Eggers fails to establish a powerful bond between father and son. It didn't amplify the hatred we felt towards Fjolnir for murdering him. Part of the problem problem is that Eggers inundates almost every scene with unrelatable Viking customs and cold, confusing dialogue, and doesn't develop the basic human elements required for a successful revenge storyline. He spends far too much time on prophecies, mysticism, and Old Norse culture instead of developing and deepening human relationships that are critical to the story. Another thing that completely misses in the script is the way Eggers uses on-the-nose dialogue to help develop his storyline.
I'm gonna fetch your father! I'm gonna save your mother! I'll kill your father!
It's literally the clearest example of the show don't tell principle in screenwriting. We should feel Amleth's rage and desire for revenge in his actions and expressions, not him yelling out and telling us about it. The desire for revenge the audience feels is magnified when it's developed using subtext and not resorting to on-the-nose one-liners. Now we see Amleth as a powerful, angry Viking warrior, and two more issues emerge that disengages the audience from the story. First, Amleth had to be reminded of his hatred for his uncle Fjornir by a witch. This makes his desire for revenge questionable. Amleth's desire for revenge should be an all-consuming thing, and he shouldn't need to be reminded of it. Otherwise, it couldn't have been very important to him growing up. What Eggers should have done is had a few scenes of Amleth growing up, obsessing over a trinket his father gave him that could have represented the love they had for each other. The desire for revenge has to be all-consuming for Amleth and feel as it's the only reason he's on this earth to do. Pay back for the murder of his father. The fact that he needed to be reminded through a plot device using a final tear took away from his authentic desire for revenge. The other major mistake Eggers makes in the script is having Amleth's uncle lose his crown and having to move to the dreary and depressing fjords of Iceland, where he is now a sheep farmer. Fjolnir loses everything he had stolen from Amleth when he killed his father. The script eliminates a significant part of the revenge story without the protagonist needing to do anything to achieve it. This was such a head-scratcher for me that, again, only acts to further remove the audience from the storyline and lessen the reason Amleth seeks his revenge. One of the best examples of a beautifully written revenge script is John Wick. The first 5 minutes shows us how much love that John Wick and his wife Helen have for each other. And when the puppy she gave to John to remember her by is brutally murdered, we were at the edge of our seats wanting revenge alongside Keanu Reeves. There are a number of other things that are wrong with the Northman. Many of the fight scenes looked as if there was a second pause before every axe or sword swing, making it look staged or choreographed. There was even a scene in the movie where the script makes Fjolnir look honorable and likable. He's the villain and must look and feel as the most hated man for the revenge story to work. It was the poorly written script and dialogue that made The Northman one of the biggest flops in 2022. Eggers saturated the movie with unrelatable Viking lore and customs to a fault, instead of using a balance as we saw in the TV show Vikings. It was a revenge story that failed on almost every level and gave the audience no satisfying payoff because he was unable to create and amplify the two most important ingredients for a revenge story to work: the protagonist's love for his father and the utter hatred of the man who stole his father from him. No amount of well-crafted visuals will save your film at the box office. If you like what you heard, I thank you for watching and invite you to subscribe and join the Poprageous community. And if you didn't like what you heard, well, I thank you all the same. And we'll see you in our next video.